Hi folks, in this video we continue to explore Kierkegaard's view by seeing how he's thinking about human nature. And this is what's really going to be influential for future thinkers. It also has some roots in the past. So we'll see some examples of folks who were thinking something similar and had leanings towards existentialism like Kierkegaard does. And in order to really understand the view of nature that emerges in all of these existentialists, you have to realize that they all view the human condition as one of deep conflict. Like it has conflicting impulses or parts. And the difficulty of the human condition is we have to try to reconcile these things. And it's so difficult to actually live authentically and achieve any kind of reconciliation. This is something that's going to run across Beauvoir, Nietzsche, Dostoevsky, and Kierkegaard. We can think about these conflicting impulses by putting it in broad terms, like a bunch of the dualisms that you might be familiar with from philosophy, like mind versus body, or the atheistic Greeks versus the Christians, the religious Christians, or the conflicts of freedom and necessity, like viewing your life as actions as free versus determined or necessitated, or just contingency, that things could have gone somewhere else, some other ways. They didn't have to be this way, versus things as fated or determined or necessary, the temporal and the versus the eternal. The human condition, we are drawn by both sides of any of these dualisms. And if you don't feel the pull of both of them, then in some sense, you're going to miss the nature of the existential condition, the human condition that these thinkers are going to put across, even the atheistic ones. So, and maybe I should say the religious in general, not necessarily just the Christian, but a spiritual dimension to life. The need for a spiritual dimension in life is maybe what properly goes over here if you want to broaden this way of thinking past the Western hemisphere or the Western European tradition. Let me make this determinate by talking about these contrasts a little more clearly. Think about the Greek philosophy and the absolutely objective views of ethics that we get from Aristotle or Plato, like Plato's forms, how there's this form of the good that determines what is right and orders nature and reality. It does this in a timeless and purely objective way. And Christian morality, in some ways, is diametrically opposed to this. If you really take seriously the idea in Christianity that God came to earth at a particular time, so it's highly temporal and particular, and to a particular people, and it was through this very particular, this one individual through which all of humanity was going to be redeemed. And in order to get into the right relationship to him and thereby to God and to be redeemed, you had to have a kind of passionate, loving commitment, not detached, objective, rational thoughts about what's right and wrong, but it was about your individual commitments to those people around you. Like the paradigm here for all of us who aren't like, the sons of God like Jesus, the apostles are like the paradigms of the way the rest of us humans could live. We would meet in our lives, the truth of Christianity and then come to follow it. And the apostles are really the perfect examples of that. Think about the trolley problem and these two different guises. From the detached objective point of view, you might say, clearly the rational thing to do, the right and moral thing to do on this objective way of thinking about values is you must save the 5 and sacrifice the 1. But from the Christian point of view, you might think, no, that's totally wrong. What if this one is somebody who you have an individual commitment to? Or what if you doing this act it puts you into the mix, and you should never do something immoral and wrong. You should never do something to cause another individual harm. There's an absolute prohibition against that, regardless of if you think it achieves some other good. You're therefore committing murder, and that's impossible. That's never excusable. That's like, think back to the lordly commandments. So hopefully you can see how both of these could get a pull on somebody. I don't know about you, but I understand why the objective moral idea that you should save the 5 over 1. So I can get my mind into the objective Greek philosophical mindset quite easily. But on the other hand, I'm a parent, and I can quite easily imagine that if this is my child, I'm letting the 5 go. I'm going to run over here instead and pull my kid off the tracks. So I can perfectly well at the same time imagine my individual commitments and my temporality and particularity guiding my decisions. And you know, let the objective morality go. I'm going to side with my family and my kids. So I can easily feel the pull of these things, feel the pull of both of them. But that's what makes the human condition tough. Now, Kierkegaard, it's essential to understand Kierkegaard's view that he thinks a lot of traditional philosophical solutions to this problem are completely unworkable, even the philosophical religious ones. So the traditional Christian solutions to this problem, he thinks, are unworkable, and they actually just dodge the difficulties of human life. So he really is an iconoclastic religious figure. So Descartes and Hegel were both Christian philosophers, although in very different ways. But Descartes is a perfect example of somebody who was deeply religious and Christian and really wanted to reconcile Christianity with Greek philosophy. And Descartes famously does this in a view called dualism, which is sort of what we're talking about. Descartes said, we have a mind and a body, and our minds are detachable from our body. So there's two different things. There's the realm of the material stuff, and then there's the realm of the spirit and the souls and the minds. But if you have this kind of dualist view, it's very easy to see that on these kind of views, if you're also a Christian like Descartes, the mind is where all the good stuff is. You know, the body is the liability. Think about the deep trend in Christianity to denying the pleasures of the body, and you know, the fact that priests in the Catholic tradition, which Descartes was in, can't marry, can't have children, they must be celibate, all of these things. So there's a way in which there's a long tradition in Christianity of denigrating the body over the soul and the mind. And it sort of makes sense. If heaven is the realm of eternal significance, then what kind of significance could this world have, except to maybe to tempt you to sin? All it could do is mess up your route into to eternal heaven. If you, so if one thing like your mind and heaven have an eternal significance, any finite benefit that this could bring is totally overwhelmed. And what you should do is you should bank everything on the eternal life of the mind. So Kierkegaard thinks, see, the human condition for Kierkegaard is you have to keep these in limbo. You have to keep both of them. And the traditional Christian solution that Kierkegaard diagnoses in both Descartes and Hegel and all other philosophers is they actually fundamentally prioritize one over the other. And because we're talking about infinite stakes like eternity, then the one that loses, the finite and the temporal one, reduces to zero significance. And that's why he thinks fundamentally these thinkers aren't really Christian. So what gets sacrificed even in Descartes and Hegel is their Christianity. And this is the sense in which Kierkegaard thinks if these philosophers are right about what they say about the mind versus the body, then we have completely lost what it is distinctive about human life. And we have therefore lost what makes Kierkegaard's view, what characterizes his existentialism and makes him such an interesting thinker and challenging in ways that we don't see in Descartes and Hegel. So for Kierkegaard, we can understand his view about the paradoxes and the paradox that the Knight of Faith has to live, because you have to somehow keep both sides of these dualisms intact. You have to not just ditch the body for the mind. That's no proper solution. You have to feel the pull of both, and you have to figure out a way of trying to actually reconcile them without eradicating one of them. You know, and Kierkegaard is not the only Christian thinker to view this. So there are some sort of proto-existentialists who I think are really fascinating and fun thinkers to read, because they have a lot of these elements, even though this is 200 years before Kierkegaard, but Pascal is a really fascinating and deep thinker because he had in some ways similar views to Kierkegaard. And actually, in some ways, the course could have started with Pascal, and he was really an outlier. Maybe existentialism should have started there, and then it sort of went dormant until Kierkegaard. Because look at what Pascal says. What a monster then is man. What a novelty. What a monster, chaos, contradiction. Judge of all things, imbecile and worm of the earth, but pride, well, the pride and refuse of the universe. So we have both the idea that the human condition is one of deep contradiction for Pascal. We also have a combination of both pride and refuse. So we have Pascal is keeping in mind this contradiction and is not eradicating them, saying, no, the worm, our bodily nature, is not truly us. Like Descartes would say, no, but the solution is you're not actually your body. You are your mind, the thing that has eternal significance, the thing that could be redeemed and live forever and is not your sinful nature. So Pascal has this idea that we actually, and this is actually the exact same, he was sort of a contemporary of Descartes, which is really interesting. This idea that we have this contradictory nature and we can't get rid of both. Or Pascal says, we do not display greatness by going to one extreme, but in touching both at once. This is the Kierkegaardian idea. This is the way in which Pascal could be the first existentialist in the modern sense, because you can't just jettison one. Pascal says, we are neither simply angel nor simply brute. And the unfortunate thing is that he who would act as the angel acts as the brute. So this is deeply insightful, I think. If you try to deny your brutish nature and just talk about your angelic nature, then people who are like that end up doing and justifying, rationalizing atrocious actions. So we should be deeply skeptical of those folks. We're going to see somebody who's very much like Pascal is Dostoevsky. So we're going to come back to views that are just like this. Let me say that Fear and Trembling is not an anomaly for Kierkegaard. So one of Kierkegaard's other famous works from this period, Sickness Unto Death, this was written right at a very similar time to Fear and Trembling. I'll show you that Kierkegaard actually works out in more detail a lot of the exact same things that I'm attributing to him in Fear and Trembling. So you might think a lot of what I'm saying is embellishing or reading between the lines. Is this really justified Kierkegaardian interpretation? I think it is, but we just don't have enough time to read all of Kierkegaard's oeuvre, because he has like dozens and dozens of books that are many of them very thick, and they're all difficult, let me warn you. But if you want to check them out, I highly recommend it. Sickness Unto Death, he says some things. So I just give you a couple of my favorite quotes. The human being is the synthesis of the finite and the infinite, of the temporal and the eternal, freedom and necessity. So here Kierkegaard is telling you exactly what he leaves between the lines in Fear and Trembling. When the Knight of Faith does the moment of infinity, but then returns and gets the finite, that keeps them both together. And that is the paradox or the absurdity of human life, that we get eternal significance because of our unconditional commitment, but it has to be something in this life. It can't be something just in heaven, in the afterlife. That then loses the significance of the earth. And that, Kierkegaard thinks, is you totally lose what's important about Christianity. You might as well just be an atheist. If you're going to be like Descartes or Hegel, the better viewpoint is to just be an atheistic scientist, because then you're not holding the two together in any meaningful way. And so Kierkegaard says, like, only in time do I become eternal. This really illustrates the paradoxical, almost incoherent nature that the Knight of Faith has to live in order to be in the highest form of the human condition for Kierkegaard. Now, I said last time that the concept of God and Jesus themselves for Kierkegaard almost become made symbolic, or they become sublimated or transfigured in certain ways. I think this passage from Sickness Unto Death really gets at what I'm talking about. God is that all things are possible, and that all things are possible as God. I think this is sort of talking about God as a symbolic function. So if your individual commitment to something in time with an unconditional eternal nature to it, that then becomes the ultimate significance and becomes what God is to you. Just like the romantic love and the lady can become the being of infinite significance for the medieval knight. Okay. Now, another interesting aspect of this for Kierkegaard is, in order for you to get one of these commitments, it has to be a commitment to something. And this is the way in which Christianity, this is a Christian kind of view, that Christianity has this idea that you cannot be redeemed alone. All of us, because of original sin, have a deeply problematic nature. And there's something that really coheres with existentialism about that view of original sin and our problematic nature. And for Christianity, then, it's only by God's grace that we can be saved. And for the story that we see in the New Testament is that it's only through, Jesus's own self-sacrifice that this is possible. That's how the Christian version of this works. But this idea that you can't do it yourself, I think, is preserved in Kierkegaard's existentialism by saying that you have to have an unconditional commitment to something. That has to be something outside of you. You can't decide that, the knight can't decide that they love themselves. Imagine this like narcissistic romantic knight who they have an unconditional commitment to themselves. That is incoherent for Kierkegaard. That can't be an unconditional commitment and get you saved. You have to find something else that provides this external relationship to you. And this is the way, there's deep Christian roots in this. So when Kierkegaard says that the self is grounded transparently in this power that constitutes it, that is, I think what he's talking about here is this unconditional commitment that does give us a life-defining significance. And it has to be something else. It's a relational concept for Kierkegaard, and I think this is an interestingly Christian concept. So the concept of this unconditional commitment that grounds us, this is the fundamental concept that gets us saved. This is faith for Kierkegaard. Okay, one last quote from Kierkegaard. No person who has learned that to exist as the individual is the most terrifying thing of all will be afraid of saying that it is also the greatest. This is back to Fear and Trembling, actually. And what he's talking about here is that there is something terrifying and horrifying about it. But I give you this so you realize this is what Kierkegaard thinks is the most authentic or the highest form of human living. This is what Kierkegaard says is the greatest form of life. So this is Kierkegaard's solution to the conflicts. He is optimistic. He doesn't think we're just condemned to live this conflict and human angst and fail, like the way that the tragic hero is destroyed by it. But somehow we can exist in this form of bliss. It's like euphoria. If you can get one of these unconditional commitments to something that give you a kind of purpose, this is wonderful if you can make it happen. Although it doesn't seem like it even makes sense. But if you can make the impossible happen, then that is the highest form of life for Kierkegaard. But it's something deeply temporal. It's not believing that everything will be made good in the afterlife. Okay, so what I've been talking about in this video is Kierkegaard's idea that we have to live this conflicted human nature. That is the human condition. And this is something that's going to run across all the existentialists that we look at in this course. The human nature, the human condition is a difficult one, which has contradictory impulses, and figuring out ways to reconcile that is what we need to do. That's what existentialism is up to for Kierkegaard. Okay, thanks.